I'm Teresa Carraggio, and this is Third Paradigm. My topic today is the dogma of atheism and the theology of superiority. In my post, You Are the Christ, I had a long conversation with Everything Voluntary Jack, who writes Jack's Responsibly Free newsletter. I have had many exchanges with Jack, and I like and respect him. He is starting a forum in the new year, which is on free friends, which he says is redundant because the origin of both friends and free is love. In this exchange, Jack describes himself as an atheist and a humanist while describing me as believing in the supernatural and the transcendental based on A Course in Miracles. In our dialogue, I look at atheism as another form of dogma that doesn't question the skin-encapsulated ego and therefore sees all shared perception as objective reality. The third paradigm that I present is the possibility that we're one mind dreaming, in which case shared perception could be subjective illusion of a dream. This opens up the possibility that reality, also known as God, could be outside of our sensory awareness. I've presented this thinking in other posts, like Kali and Ultimate Reality and What is the Matter on Ian McGilchrist, and I link to those in my Substack. But our discussion illustrated some communication truncators that I've touched on in other episodes that I think are important for clarifying our co-thinking in the new year. So let's delve in. The root of conspiracy means to breathe together, to share the same spirit. We need to be thinking together, to share the question as a quest for the truth. And that requires analyzing our preconceptions, the paradigms that are how we think before we think we're thinking, and to be deliberate in our habits of debate. My first principle is to enthusiastically love the person and relentlessly challenge the ideas. This can be misunderstood, especially when someone's identity is tied up with I am statements rather than I think. For instance, I'm often described as critical of Jews and Christians when instead I'm critical of their ideology and the behaviors that it condones. My basis for criticism is always the same. It is always superiority. My only dogma or belief that I will not raise to question is that I'm no better than anyone else. And so my challenge to ideas or behaviors, including techniques of debate, are always that they're disguising a belief in superiority. This is often perceived as me trying to make myself superior, rather than arguing for the superiority of my idea that we're all equally good, equally wanting to love and be loved. Superiority is the thing that blocks our recognition that we're all one mind. If I see myself as superior to you, the last thing I want is to see you as me in another form. So, with respect for Jack and his courage to challenge my ideas in my own forum, I'm going to quote from his points and my responses to show from my perspective, 1, why atheism is another form of dogma, 2, the techniques of rigorous discussion and rhetorical devisives, as I call them, that thwart it, 3, how the habits of superiority can be used to undermine, in particular, women's arguments. I hope that viewers and readers will point out if I'm contradicting my own principles and not being fair in my analysis. Let me know if you disagree with my methods of productive dialogue or have facts or logic that challenge my views. Let's do this. On Christmas Day, Everything Voluntary Jack wrote, "Thank you, Teresa, for your heartfelt season's greetings and A Course in Miracles poem. As your opposite, wearing my atheist and humanist hat, I consider we share a voluntarist halo, And so in the new year, we'll be inviting you and others to join our new forum, tentatively titled Free Friends Forum, Abandoned to Ourselves, of Voluntary Humanism, Naturalism, Individualism. Looking forward to having your voluntary, transcendental, supernatural, mostly, individualism, close, thoughts, feelings. The serious study of man, he quotes, of his natural faculties and their successive developments, research into political and moral life, considers what we would have become abandoned to ourselves, from the Discourse on the Origin and Basis of Inequality Among Men by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And, therefore, if God existed, only in one way could he serve human liberty, by ceasing to exist. A jealous lover of human liberty and deeming it the absolute condition of all we admire and respect in humanity, I reverse the phrase of Voltaire and say that if God really existed, it would be necessary to abolish him. God and the State by Michael Bakunin. Happy New Year, with interest and care, Jack. I replied, ha ha, that would be a false dichotomy to have us as opposites. We share a belief in the goodness of other people and the courage to face the truth. That's my dogma, and all the rest is just speculation, open to new experiences. Looking forward to continuing the conversation in the new year. I love that. Happy New Year back at ya. Jack answered, only opposites in those two beliefs, God and Homo sapiens sapiens, which are not important compared to everything voluntary, where I believe we share the same belief. My dog is a ma, and I have her on my leash, lest we transpose our ends and she becomes my God and leads me. Happy hippie New Year of upstream peaceful parenting. See you soon, I hope, in the new forum, Free Friends. By the way, earliest etymology of free and friends both are love. I wrote, I don't believe in God, Jack. I don't believe there's no God. I don't believe in believing, which is making up your mind ahead of your experience or new facts. God, purpose, meaning are all synonyms. So the real question is whether purpose and meaning exist, other than what we make up. My experience of synchronicities and happy coincidences leads me to suspect they do. But that's not something I'd see if I wasn't leaving open the possibility of a God worth having around and being willing to question the existence of the world and myself. Lovely phrases, New Year of upstream peaceful parenting. Great time for starting this new forum. Jack posted, looking forward to conversing with you and others on these topics in the Free Friends Forum. For me, we need to begin with definitions, and I side with Voltaire. Define your terms, you will permit me to say, or we shall never understand one another. And agree with Saz. In the animal kingdom, the rule is eat or be eaten. In the human kingdom, define or be defined. One man's dog is another woman's God, smiling. Get free and stay free. Happy hippie New Year. I wrote, I've been saying that defining terms is the first step for years, but never had those excellent quotes from Voltaire and Saz to back it up. Jack answered, a favorite must-read of mine for many years has been a book few seem to know exists, unfortunately for us all, The Guru Papers, Masks of Authoritarian Power by Joel Kramer and Diana Alstad. For me, it has always been about power, control, authority, and the only Homo sapiens sapiens who live up to their double wise names that I want to live with are those who have claimed themselves as their sole and ultimate authority. No gods, gurus, or governments, thanks. I note you are a follower, fan, believer in A Course in Miracles. Joel and Diana, I knew them by email a bit. He is now dead, she's still living, have a chapter on it I hope you will read. Here is a quote from it. The Course, calls the world we live in an illusion to be transcended and is specific about calling all separation an illusion. It likewise denigrates the self and self-centeredness with such statements as either God or ego is insane. Its central message is that through surrendering to God's will, which is pure love, illusions will evaporate and one will become eternally one with God. The essential methodology used to achieve this is forgiveness. Of more interest to us is its claim of not being authoritarian. It is overtly stated that it is not necessary to believe any of the Course's assertions to experience the promised transformations. This claim is worth examining because under the guise of presenting objective truth that any seeker can find, what is actually going on is the age-old ploy of authoritarian indoctrination. A worldview is presented by an unchallengeable authority as the truth to be found. Then practices are given that reprogram and condition the mind to that viewpoint. Jack continues, we will discuss such perspectives in our new Free Friends Forum. These quotes to leave you with. How much easier is self-sacrifice than self-realization? The urge to escape our real self is also an urge to escape the rational and the obvious. The refusal to see ourselves as we are develops a distaste for facts and cold logic. There is no hope for the frustrated in the actual and the possible. Salvation can come to them only from the miraculous, which seeps through a crack in the iron wall of inexorable reality. They ask to be deceived. The substitute for self-confidence is faith. The substitute for self-esteem is pride. And the substitute for individual balance is fusion with others in a compact group. The short-lived self, teetering on the edge of irrevocable extinction, is the only thing that can ever really matter. Thus, the renunciation of the self is felt as a liberation and salvation. Eric Hoffer. I replied, how could I be a believer in the Course when I don't believe in believing? The Course is my daily practice for the last 20 years, and I describe myself as a practitioner. It would be a strange sort of authority since there's no leaders, no group, no organization, no money, just a book with no author. To whom am I giving away my power? How do you define authority, and to whom would a challenge be directed? It's funny, though. It's like you're asking me to take Joel and Diana's authority over mine for their interpretation of a text I've studied for 2 decades. It seems like to do that, I need to abandon my own authority as a person who knows how to read and to think, as well as they do. To accept their authority, I'd have to say, despite my own experience, that the Course continues to be worth my time and study. Silly me. Obviously, I've been brainwashed. I'm too dumb to realize when I'm being manipulated. The world wars, the Bible, Ukraine, Israel, the COVID con, the Constitution, those are just little power plays that anyone could see through, and most people do, right? But I'm still a gullible fool asking to be deceived, with a distaste for facts and cold logic. I think that's how most of my readers would describe me, yes? Joel and Diana's interpretation of the Course are not how I'd phrase them, so let me take the one direct quote. Either God or the ego is insane. Would you logically disagree with that? You take as dogma that the idea of God is insane. So your faith is in the flesh-encapsulated mind, aka the ego self, the self as separate from everything outside the skin. There is no meaning other than what the ego creates. The ego created itself and is its only purpose. So there's no basis to decide what's true because it's different for every ego. If your purpose is superiority and mine is forgiveness, they're both equally true. If your purpose is to inflict the maximum amount of pain and mine is to heal, they're both equally valid. There's no purpose, no meaning, no reality other than what we create. We are our own gods. Yes? Jack wrote, much to reply to here. I think I will make this into a Substack chat. Thank you for sharing your feelings, which it seems I have hurt, which was not my intention. My apologies. Quickly, going on definitions to give us a stable base, can we agree on this one regarding belief? What I mean by a belief system, then, is simply a set of propositions held to be true, to which some emotional charge, affect, is attached, and which gives more or less cogent expression to a general sense of how the world is, from Toward a Science of Belief Systems by Edmund Griffiths. You have a belief in A Course in Miracles, as I have a belief in reason and the scientific method, to which I think we are both passionately attached. Agree? I invite you to read that chapter on A Course in Miracles by Joel and Diana, and as I will be referencing it if I move our exchange here to a public chat, I hope that you will join me and others so we can continue this discussion there. For as Eric Hoffer, whose words might have offended you, wrote, there are no chaste minds. Minds copulate wherever they meet. The wise learn from the experience of others, and the creative know how to make a crumb of experience go a long way. Let us see what kind of responsibly free children our best thoughts may foster. I answered, this, of course, is my forum where I've been training readers in the techniques of productive dialogue. The first step is framing the question. The second is defining what you mean by all the terms in the question. The third is enthusiastically loving the person while relentlessly challenging the ideas. The fourth is identifying rhetorical devisives, as I call them, that are ways that logically lead away from answering the question and instead into winning. Here's how I'd frame the question. Is it more open-minded/useful to believe dogmatically there is no God, or to define the kind of God whose possibility you'd be willing to entertain? My definition of belief is making up your mind about something in advance of knowledge in the form of facts or experience. But we can go with Griffiths. As I thought I stated clearly, and maybe so insistently you thought my feelings were hurt, I don't believe in the Course. I don't believe in believing, other than my sole dogma that I'm no better than anyone else. You do have, on the other hand, a set of propositions held to be true, to which some emotional charge, affect, is attached, and which give more or less cogent expression to a general sense of how the world is. This is a belief that your mind is separate from all other minds. So whatever you see that someone else sees must be outside your mind, objective rather than subjective reality. I entertain the possibility that there's a third paradigm to reality. If our minds aren't separate, then what we see in common could be our shared delusion. I don't believe this, but I see it as a third hypothesis, along with creationism and evolution. In that case, it's possible that reality exists outside and not consistent with our illusion, which is the only way that a God consistent with my dogma of everyone being equally lovable and loved could exist. I know you think highly of me and like me, Jack. I'm not easily offended, and I don't think you could if you tried. But here are the rhetorical devisives you used. One which I often get is characterizing my logical arguments as an emotional response of hurting my feelings. I'm certain that women get this more than men. It deflects away from addressing the logical fallacies I pointed out in your argument and instead makes it about how I feel. Certainly, when I took quotes from Joel and Diana and applied them to me, they were pretty insulting. And that's why I did that, to show that theirs was an attack on the character of the person studying the course, asserting their own superiority, not a debate of the concepts. 2, it's contradictory that in your argument against authority, you're using an argument of authority. Several, actually, with all your quotes. You've never read the course, but are taking Joel and Diana's secondhand interpretation of it as fact. You want me to essentially argue with people who are irrefutable authorities because they're not actually present, living or dead, standing in for you. What would be the purpose other than you winning? 3rd, you're looking to change the venue away from the context that prompted it and those for whom my ideas have enough credibility to read them. I've worked hard to keep my comment threads free of insults and bullying, even in nice forums. I don't mind reposting my response on a note, but the internet is full of people, okay, mostly men, looking to win debates and show off. I'd rather do a post quoting you if you wanted to open it up to more people. Jack's last comment was, this will be a response to just one topic of your response here. I wrote, it is obvious you have much emotional charge on this topic of A Course in Miracles. This was in response to your statement on the Guru Papers that, obviously, I've been brainwashed. I'm too dumb to realize when I'm being manipulated. Now, I think it would be obvious to any neutral reader that your words carry an emotional charge and you seemed offended by the quote. You continue and amplify your emotional charge in your latest response, where you say, I'm not easily offended and I don't think you could if you tried, but here are the rhetorical devisives you used, and then he quotes them. Again, I think it obvious to any neutral reader your words are very emotionally charged, and you are offended and felt attacked by the Guru Papers quote, which I put part of here, and then he quotes it. Contrary to your emotionally charged rhetoric, you did not use your logic and reason to point out any inaccuracies of the above summary of the course. I have verified the quote in Chapter 11, and their paraphrasing of its central message seems to me, new close reader that I am, to be accurate. Why would these words upset you so much? And further, why did the rest of the Guru Papers quote stir such strong anger in you? He then quotes it again and says, this claim of authoritarian indoctrination applied to the Course to me is a worthy challenge to believers in the Course, and I consider it worth a reasonable, respectful discussion. I will leave it here for our discussion and will invite you to my new forum to discuss more from the Guru Papers, which I hope will attract you and other believers in what I term ghost of the subjective mind, which to me is exactly what the Course is hosting in abundance in their book. As the Guru Papers repeatedly establishes, persons are attracted to feel-good security blanket tracts practices like the Course because they do not trust themselves to be able to cope with life's vicissitudes. In times of upheaval, the appeal of gurus and authorities, he quotes, whether spiritual or secular, is really reaching for an anchor of stability. The following chapters aim to show how and why any person, ideology, or structure that in the short or long run undermines a person's self-trust is part of the problem, not the solution. I hope you will take up my offer and get a digital copy of the Guru Papers from me or a print copy somewhere and actually read it. Bring it with you to our Free Friends Forum, where I will be going through its relevant wisdom that I consider will help us establish a voluntarist planet of individuals who trust themselves to be their sole authority and wish to help others do the same. And he ends with a quote from Goethe, "As you come to trust yourself, you will know how to live." I ended with, "Ha ha, nothing like doubling down, Jack. I guess I'll need to amend my statement that you couldn't offend me if you tried. Okay, since you insist, I'll turn this into an episode so that neutral viewers can weigh in, unless you think my audience consists of others believers in ghost of the subjective mind. Not that any of us should be offended by being told we're attracted to feel-good security blanket tracks, practices like the Course, because we do not trust ourselves to be able to cope with life's vicissitudes. There's certainly no assumption of superiority in that. Jack, I'm not angry at all. Why would I be? But it's curious that you don't recognize what you're quoting as secondhand insults, which is a more cowardly way to insult someone through another person's words that have the ring of authority. I think it's a good illustration of what I intentionally call rhetorical devisives, because they use language to divide and conquer, not to come together to answer questions. So let's look at the rhetorical devisives in this. The first I call the toxic tilt. You're emotional, I'm rational. Women will likely be familiar with this divisive because it's commonly cited in relationship counseling. Saying, "I'm sorry you were offended," is different than saying, "I'm sorry I offended you." Likewise, "I'm sorry you felt attacked," or "I didn't mean to hurt your feelings," is not "I'm sorry I attacked or hurt you." It doesn't own what it was in the words that were actually offensive. So one puts responsibility on the receiver for their response, and the other takes responsibility for the action. And Jack's "why would these words upset you so much?" takes us even further in asking me to justify my clearly irrational and emotional response, deflecting any responsibility for his quotes, denigrating me as a person rather than him debating the ideas using his own words. And then you've been framed, framing the debate. 3 times before the cock crows, Jack goes back to his original frame of the debate, my belief in the Course versus his belief in humanity without authority, guru, or government. 3 times I deny that I have beliefs other than in the equal goodness of all people. So I'm left arguing for something that I don't believe in. On the other hand, Jack belies his belief in authority by consistently quoting them rather than using his own words. He takes the cleverest wordsmiths in literary history and sets me up to have to argue with them. In another episode, I do cover David's Graeber and Wengrow in their critique of Rousseau, something that took them a full chapter to discuss. But that's not the question that we're dissecting. Then, throwing the book at it, the appeal to authority. Repeatedly, Jack holds the Guru book in front of his face and asks me to argue with it. When it characterizes the Course as an age-old ploy of authoritarian indoctrination, I either need to accept that as fact or go point by point through the 1,500 pages of the Course and explain why I differ from their interpretation. For Jack, their paraphrasing of its central message seems to me, close reader that he is, to be accurate. Well then, unless I can deflect that in a soundbite, that beats my 20 years of study. I need to read their chapter on it, according to him, which would show why Jack's right and I'm wrong. What would be the point? I'm not debating the deceased Joel or Diana. Jack already accepts their authority. So it's substituted an unwinnable argument with a ghost authority who can't be challenged, instead of a true dialogue for which the precondition is that both sides are willing to change their minds. The question on which I'm willing to change my mind, I framed as, is it more open-minded or useful to believe dogmatically that there is no God, or to define the kind of God whose possibility you'd be willing to entertain? It is certainly possible to believe there is no God and believe dogmatically in your own superiority. I'm not saying that Jack does this, but Darwin certainly does, as I write about in the episode When Words Die, Worlds Die. Atheist Yuval Noah Harari certainly does. In Alien Nation, I plot 6 atheists and 4 theists on a y-axis depending on their belief in their own superiority. And I find that superiority and equality are both bipartisan and a greater predictor of behavior than a belief in God. I'm willing to consider the possibility that there is no God, no meaning, no purpose, in which case we are all equal and the product of our circumstances. I'm willing to consider a God to whom we are all equally loved, loving, and lovable. But I reject any ideology of superiority, which includes the Bible and the survival of the fittest. Both justified slavery and colonization. The supremacy of the most ruthless is more like it. If there is no God, the supremacy of the most ruthless is ultimate reality. The ability to inflict the maximum amount of pain will always win, creating docile servitude through fear. It's foolish for me, under that premise, to be doing the things that I'm doing and saying what I am and pointing out what's happening and who's doing it. I should be cowering in fear and shutting up. It won't make any difference anyway. They own the money system and they have greed and violence on their side. The empire will always win. Would it be useful for me to reject any possibility that things are not as we see them and that there is a reality that makes sense elsewhere? I don't see how, and I don't see why Jack would want me to do that. My life is my witness. If I were to say absolutely nothing but what I see exists, I'm not going to be doing this. It would be ridiculous for me to. So I think that we should be considering all the possibilities and not rejecting any one of them unless it contradicts our dogma. I don't trust myself, but I do trust all of you. And that's the kind of faith that I believe in. For more on Darwin's doctrine of superiority, here's When Words Die, Worlds Die, and then for David Graeber on Rousseau, this is Muskrat Love and Anarchy. Thank you to Jack for being a good sport, and thank you all for watching.